Hey everyone, welcome to the Rebuild podcast. I am so excited to be here with Andrea from Intentional Healing and Wellness. She is going to share a dynamic story. I don't even want to tease this and give you all any of the tidbits because you have to hear her tell you about how she got to be where she is. I have known Andrea for years and she's just a dynamic person, and there's sometimes when I'm kind of scared to do something and I hear her in my head saying a particular phrase. So when they say she lives rent free, she actually does live rent free in my head. So Andrea, welcome to the Rebuild.
Thank you. Thank you, Tiffany. I am so excited to be here with you today for this conversation. I can't wait to see where we go and what we're going to dive into, but I'm really grateful and maybe I could stop paying you some rent.
That would be
Pay you
awesome.
some
No,
rent.
listen, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about the things. We'll talk about the things. But before we go any further, introduce yourselves. Tell this audience, tell this community who you are. Give us a little bit about you.
Absolutely. So, hi, everybody. My name is Andrea Mancuso. I am the founder of Intentional Healing and Wellness, which is a coaching and consulting business. I am a licensed mental health counselor and facilitator, speaker, former school psychologist of 14 years, and really excited to be out here, with leadership coaching and focusing on emotional intelligence work. So that's a bit about me and what I'm up to these days.
I have to tell you, last night I was with the neighbors, with some of my neighbors, and we're just hanging out, kind of chatting. And so we were talking about what we were going to do this weekend. And so they know that I typically will record the podcast episodes. And so they said, well, who are you having on the Rebuild next? And so I started to tell them about you. And I said, she was in the New York City Department of Education for 14 years. And they're like, 14 years. They couldn't believe it. And I think that if you're an educator or education adjacent, or if you have children, you really understand um, how, first of all, it's an incredible opportunity to get to work in the New York City Department of Education. For all of its flaws, it is still probably very competitive and challenging to get into. You all serve a very large number of children. Tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about what led you to the Department of Education.
Yeah. So, well, it's interesting because when I was in college, knew towards the end, like grad school was never on my radar. I grew up in Brooklyn. I was born in the late 70s, grew up in Brooklyn in the 80s, and, first of my family to go to college, which was a big deal. And I never even, to be honest, knew about graduate school. And as I was coming closer to finishing up, I started to think about, well, I know I wanted to be psychology. I always had a passion. And I think it's from growing up in Brooklyn and during times where there was a lot of violence, there was a lot of crime, there was a lot happening. So I grew up at a very young age observing and really watching people's behavior to be able to see when there was subtle changes in how they were acting because I knew that that can lead to all of the things. And so I knew I wanted it to be psychology. And then I started thinking, well, what about school psychology? Because then you'll have the schedule of a teacher, right? Where you'll be able to have summers off and all the things. So that's actually what led me to pick school psychology. And I started to study at Fordham University for my degree in Lincoln Center. I knew I wanted it to be this New York City public school system. They have, at the time, it was one of the most competitive packages, for employees in terms of pension and, you know, salary. And really, you end up with 3 months off per year because you have the 2 months off of the summer. And then you have like Christmas week and
Yeah.
into recess, right? So Easter. So there's a lot of time. So it was a strategic decision from that standpoint to enter into the system. And when I got into the system, that was 2007. My role as a school psychologist was, I would say, at its prime at that point, because the psychology role was really about supporting students with what they were going through, at that particular time. Somewhere around 2011, it started to change to a very case management paperwork heavy position.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that is when, I was like, "Hmm, this is very different than what I actually wanted."
Right.
So that's a bit about how I got into it and then, before all of the struggles start to happen within the system.
I really didn't know that, but I could see how that could happen, like, how they would go into a more, like, case focused. I could see that. I'm thinking about the changes that were occurring in the world at that time, but I can imagine that that probably left you feeling restricted and, maybe unhappy and not really doing the work that you knew that you wanted to.
Yeah, it was really a disheartening, it was slow, it was a gradual change, and what happened was they did away with one particular role. So I was part of the school assessment team, and so if students were experiencing anything pertaining to emotional difficulties or
Mhm.
academic difficulties, the team would get involved to evaluate and determine what supports and what services should be provided. They did away with one of the roles of the team members. And when that happened, that's when the case manager, which was the school psychologist, became responsible for everything. And so it was less about being able to help the students in front of me, and it was more about evaluation after evaluation after it reminds me, you remember back in the day there was the I Love Lucy episode where she's like eating the
Yes,
candy off
yes,
of stuff,
and then she's
right?
trying to eat as many as she possibly
Yeah,
can.
exactly. Well, that was sort of like what was happening, except it was with evaluations. It was
Right.
like, you're sort of moving along this conveyor belt of test, implement service, test, implement service.
Mhm.
And I was like, this is not what I got into this for, because now I had less support, less ability to be with the students. And it was a lot of, paperwork. And so that continued and was really a big part of my exit in 2021. It just got worse and worse and worse. And then I was like, the pandemic happened, and I was like, this is the writing on the wall here.
So what that makes me think of is, so I can imagine your position and your daily work changing, but I imagine that there must have been something changing for you as well. Because many
Yeah.
people have a role, have a position where the job is changing, the demands of the actual position, the demands of your management are changing. But I wonder what started to change for you? What started to change for you personally?
We're going to spill all the tea right here, right
I
here.
mean it's right here.
That's what it is. That no, so it's interesting. I have never told the story in this way connected to, career, but a lot was changing, and especially as I entered the system. So I was just discovering in my first year of being a school psychologist. I had just learned in my personal life, I was living with my partner, and we were together, him and I, for about 2 years at the time. I had just discovered a major betrayal in terms of he was basically living like a double life and was arrested for being part of a heroin drug ring in Brooklyn that I had no idea about. And my whole world blew up. And so at this time, when I'm like learning the career and in it and doing all of my, you know, real life application of everything that I studied, I now have my whole personal life blown up and in a way where it was very unsettling because to discover that you're with someone and you really thought you knew them and had plans to move forward with them, and take things to a more serious level, and then find out that everything you thought you knew was not accurate. And there's this like secret life. That was what was unraveling in the background, and so I was not only sort of really, at the time, now getting used to the system, getting used to what the job it consisted of, and really doing my thing. I was also very much discovering, like, well, now what? It felt like a sleeping with the enemy type of situation,
Yeah.
because it's like you don't know the person. And so there was literally, when we were in a conversation of rebuild, it was, I would say, the day one of my rebuild. Now, I didn't know it then, but it was also day one of an intentional healing and wellness journey beginning. And so it when I just basically discover all this reality, and I'm like, what do I do? And I was so scared because when you really discover that someone's living a secret life and you have no idea what's happening, you start to question everything because it's almost like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You know, it's like now you can start to look back and things that felt normal for you are suddenly feeling like, oh my God, that's scary because I thought it was one thing. It was
Yeah.
totally another thing. Right.
Mhm.
So I would say that at this point of my life, everything had crashed and crumbled. And on the outside, I was doing really well. You're in this career, you worked so hard to get here, you're doing all of the things, you landed the role. I had off for the summer months, so I was, like, free to travel or do what I wanted, and on the inside, I was just, like, crash out, crash and burn. So that's, like, a peek behind the curtain at that time.
So I think what's so interesting,
Mm.
I never knew this. I've never known
Yeah,
this, and I'll give just to give y'all a little bit of background. So, yes, my background in psychology as well. My degree is in psychology, and um, Andrea and I have known each other. I say on a personal working. Our business is like our relationship is like a personal working relationship. Not that we're
yeah.
hiding anything, but I don't think I knew that that's what unfolded, and what occurred to me as you were speaking, um, is that often because of the work we do, when you and I are together working, like we're really in service to other people.
Totally.
Like I feel like I'm very confident working with you because I know your working style. I know how you're going to show up. I know
Yeah.
you are going to be supporting left, right, and center. And I think that in this case, like our styles are similar. And so it's so interesting. Like I was getting goosebumps hearing you tell this story because we've not discussed this. So this is like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, it's just an incredible story. The other thing is, I think that you are hitting on something that so many people feel with the betrayal. And it could be a
Right.
betrayal, that happens in your career. It could be a betrayal pretty much primarily with a relationship and not
Yeah.
necessarily just a romantic relationship. It could be a friend relationship where you're questioning all of the things. Was I feeling something that wasn't there? Was I oblivious? Was I trying to stick my head? All these feelings that come up. And so it's so interesting to hear you speak about this so vulnerably. So like thank you so much. I had no idea. And I think that a lot of our audience will resonate with this.
Yeah, and something to that, thank you, Tiffany. And something for, I would say two things. For a long time, sharing that story was very much the only way I knew how to do it for a long time was to share it in a way where I felt like the victim in the story,
Oh, got it.
because I was very much like taken advantage of. And, my signature was forged and I had to pay $10,000 or almost in this bill, and there was so many parts of it that I felt like this happened to me, and so, excuse me, for a long time, I was in that space, and it wasn't until I was able to really learn how to reinterpret the story and really look for the lesson and like spiritual assignment attached to it, if you will, that I've been able to speak differently about it and be grateful for it, right? Because the truth is, I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you if that didn't happen,
Yeah.
all the way back when. And when I was first experiencing it, I didn't have access to that, right? It was like it took years of me being on my own intentional healing journey to then end up launching a business and then end up supporting tons of people to be able to arrive at, wow, if I didn't have that happen, and if I didn't, I wouldn't be set on a different trajectory, and go in a different direction. So, for anybody who's listening, I just want to shine the light on, if you are someone who is experiencing a level of betrayal, a level of hurt, a level of disappointment, heartbreak, I want to just encourage you to, you may not have access to it now, but think about, reflect on how this can wind up being like your comeback story, your win, and what will become possible for you because you experienced this. Because I do believe that these types of experiences change us. And then something else that you said, Tiffany, that I just want to hit on, and this may really be able to support somebody who's also listening, is the brain, the mind is so fascinating. And it does this thing where it's like a coping and it's a way of interpreting challenging information, right?
So
Where
good.
it's
I
like
was
when you are betrayed in such a way, or you're hurt in such a way, or you experience some level of pain, the mind does this thing where it starts to search for how could I have missed it? And
Yeah.
why did this happen? And how didn't I see it? And that's because you're really trying to make sense of an experience. In this moment, anybody who's listening, the reality is you can't always, right? Because we're working with what we have on our plate at a certain time, the amount of information. And a lot of times it doesn't always give us the big picture, right? So do you want to add something to that? Because I know that this kind of like got something in
No,
you.
you're that's it. You hit it on the head. You hit it on the head. The other thing that I was thinking about that I really love that you said, and I love that we can have these conversations. Like, I just love that. I love that
Yeah,
we can have these conversations.
so good.
The thing that I really love that you said is that before you got to the healing work, like you got to, and even when you spoke about it, you said this first, like you had to be in it and you had to experience it before you got to the reframing and the rebuilding and the interpretations. And what I've found often is that, and I don't know if you see this in your work as well, but what I've found is that people are trying to reinterpret for other people so quickly, and they don't
Yeah,
allow people the opportunity to sit with what is.
totally.
And
1000%.
I get that people wanna be positive and they wanna, be optimistic, but sometimes you gotta sit with what is, else we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation.
100%, totally. I feel like that's a very unspoken form of like a toxic positivity in a sense, right? Where we're rushing and it's this bypassing that happens where
Yes.
we're rushing past, the hard part, the sad part, the angry part. Right now, granted, there's time for all of it.
Right.
If someone is just if someone is staying in this space of feeling, whatever, let's call it, in my case, I'm going to reference it as like if I would have stayed in this space of feeling like a victim indefinitely, my life would not be what it is, and it wouldn't be, I wouldn't have the fulfillment and the impact and opportunities for myself. So I get that there's, an attempt to have reframes happen, but I do also agree with you that it's timely,
Yeah.
and we can't rush past people's like natural processes, especially when it comes to healing. There's levels. The same way if we, were running and I fell and I cut my whole, hand open in the moment to be like, okay, offer like, what's possible wouldn't make sense because it's still oozing. It still needs to be treated. It still needs to be covered and you need to put medicine and you need to check on it. And that's what happens with our emotional state. Except I think what happens, people feel uncomfortable with the emotions of it. So it's like, hurry, hurry, let's quick and find a quick reframe. And yeah, it doesn't serve, I don't think, either party when it comes to that.
At all, at all. I was actually thinking about when people have heart bypass surgery, that the bypass is to go around the normal method, right? Go around the way the heart normally beats and the way the heart normally pumps blood in and out. And this
Yeah,
bypass is not it's not a permanent solution. So it's not necessarily sustainable. Like
right.
eventually the valves need to be repaired. And so I get what I get when people try to bypass the emotions. I understand, but it's not sustainable. Like, you can't do that forever. Eventually, you're gonna have to do the work, and you're gonna have to sit with this. And often, like you said, people do this to make themselves feel better. So they're offering
Totally.
these suggestions. Oh, don't cry. Oh, don't
Yeah,
worry about. Oh, you're better off without him. That's great. That makes you feel better, and it might
yeah,
make me feel better temporarily, but it's not sustainable.
yeah. No, it's not. And the thing is, my business was built on this philosophy that time does not heal all wounds.
That part.
And, what I love right now about the work that I'm doing is my oldest client is in his 80s.
Wow.
And he hired me, he's 82 actually. And he hired me because he said, I'm so tired of feeling like I'm not good enough. I want to be loved, and I do not wanna anymore be held back by my childhood trauma. And we started to work together when he was 80. And I was so blown away when I was contacted about this particular individual and setting up a call to see if it worked, right, for us, if we were a good match for each other. Because I was thinking, this is literally the reason why I believe my mission is so important, because I'm inviting people to run towards the thing as opposed to running away from all of it. And it was so meaningful that he was in his 80s, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, this, like, look, this is the evidence that the time doesn't heal all the wounds, right? And when we start to do the work together and I start to hear what is it that he's struggling with, I'm hearing things of like seeds that were planted when he was in his first decade of life
Mm.
and when he was in his second decade. And it just speaks to how important it is that we face the thing and we don't try to bypass, right? Because there will come a time, God willing, for everybody who's listening and everybody that's out there, that you will finally get to a point of like, wait a minute, I attempted to run from all of this, and it would have actually made more sense and been easier to just do it. Because then you can like run through it and be free from it all.
Yeah.
So it's so powerful in terms of the bypass conversation and why in this day and age it's really not a good idea,
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I love that your client is in his 80s. I mean,
right?
that is just proof that this work, it's necessary, it needs to be done. So, on the rebuild, we talk a lot about rebuilding after a major life shift, after the loss of a relationship, the loss of a loved one, a career pivot. What is it what was the moment for you that had you say, "You know what? I'm going to go all in on intentional healing and wellness." What made you say, "I'm that girl. I'm that girl that can do this?"
So this is a good one. So it was the height of the pandemic in New York City, and we were literally watching without much information about what was going on. The death toll and the hospitalization toll on the news every single day, right? You were there,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
thousands and thousands, and everything was shut down and everything was so scary. I get like the goosebumps just thinking about it. And my brother, my older brother, ended up in ICU with COVID. And so this is at the time that they were doing testing, like you pull up in a random parking lot and there was like lines, right? We didn't
Yeah.
know what was going on. And he started to not feel well, started to have like some level of fever. And we were kind of all concerned because we couldn't be around each other at the time. And the long story short of it is that he calls me in the middle of the night. I end up having to call him an ambulance. He goes to the hospital and winds up getting put into ICU with COVID induced meningitis. So an infection in the brain. And Tiffany, like you and I know each other at that time because this was, 2020. I mean, I've been in this field like with therapeutic intervention and counseling and, supporting school communities and parents and staff. I lost access to every
Mm.
single thing that I knew about like stress management and coping. And I was in fetal position in my bed for 3 days, literally. And if for anybody who, people who know me and hear this will laugh because I don't lose my appetite. Well, that's not one thing that ever happens to me. But this time of my life, I lost, like, I couldn't eat. I couldn't even drink. I was literally in bed for 3 days. And, no, probably mistakes that on the third day, I sat up, excuse me, in my bed and literally had a conversation with myself out loud where I said, Andrea, we have no clue what is going to happen here because I couldn't go on the way I was like going on. He was in ICU now. This was like day 3 or 4 at the point. I am sitting in the bed like a wreck. And I said, you have no clue what is going to happen here. You are either going to go through this pandemic in this way, which is not going to be good for your health, for the rest of your family's health, for your friends, and for everybody. You are going to take every single thing that you have ever learned, every single thing that you've had access to, every tool, every distinction, every strategy, and you are going to create something to go forward. And I sat up in my bed, got my laptop, and literally logged in to do the LLC for my business. And
Wow.
that is how, like, it really all came. I said, "If you're struggling like this, imagine the people who don't have a master's degree in therapeutic intervention, who don't have 13 at the time, it was 13 years experience in a school system supporting staff and students to feel better and overcome, you know, coaching experience, right? I've had at that point had almost 5 years experience of coaching people and supporting people to be their best self. So I was like, come on, like this is the moment. And so that was in May of 2020, and since then I've been on a very, wild entrepreneurial journey.
Absolutely. It's been really good. It's been really
Yeah.
good. I wonder how like that part of the journey shows up for your clients, like shows up when you coach your clients.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've noticed and one of the things that has been shared with me often from, I would say majority of, I hear it a lot, is that they know and they know that I'm walking the walk, right? So when we work together and I'm sharing or, helping, asking them certain questions, and I don't share about myself when I'm working with clients unless it's something that I feel will forward them, where it really makes sense to connect some
Right.
dots and say like, hey, what, this happens and this is what worked for me. And a lot of times, it all kind of clicks then. But yeah, I think what really shows up for clients and whether it be in a group setting or individually, is that they know that the things that I encourage or support them with, I'm speaking of from having done it myself and lived it. Now, it may not be the exact same scenario, right? I may not be able to speak to them about, a particular scenario they're going through, but when we're talking about fear, they know that I've been out here like living my life in a way where I'm scared, but I choose to do things anyway, or when I'm speaking to them about like anxiety or depression, they know that I'm speaking from a place of like, I know what it was like to be laid out in the bed for 3 days and not function and then make a decision. Cause I do believe it starts with a decision.
Yeah, sometimes that's all that it takes is for someone to like get resolute in their minds and make a decision about
Totally.
something. So I can definitely identify with that. And I think that your clients will as well. I wonder how it's been for your friends and your family because I know you have a really strong support system with your family. And I wonder how has your work helped to maintain or maybe it's changed your family dynamic or your friend dynamic. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I would say it's funny because I would say that my rebuild, right, and my decision to change everything in my life, I would say has been really a disruptor for my family,
Absolutely. Yeah, your family was probably like, "Oh my goodness, she went to school, she did all of this, she worked all of these years, and now she's gonna give up a New York City Department of Education pension? It's unheard
Yeah.
of. It's unheard of."
It's like it's so I think for when it was all happening, it's funny because I joke with them about it and, tease them and sort of bring it up often. But I think when it was all happening, everybody was like, sort of holding on tight, like, what the hell? Because I think at that time, everybody thought I was having somewhat of like a midlife crisis, with in now being where I am in the season that I'm in my life, in ways, I think so too. I think that there was like, this midlife era that I was in, but didn't realize like how it was impacting me. However, I don't regret any of the decisions and it's like all the way it's supposed to be. But yeah, I would say that my decision to start to live my life in such a way where I was questioning and challenging, and it was born in the pandemic, really, because I never thought before the pandemic that there would be all of this virtual capability to
Yeah.
do the work, that we do. when I always envisioned like, well, what could my life look like if I were to leave this career and start something different? I always envisioned like being at a different workplace and being in another setting. So all of a sudden, when everybody was taking to Zoom and taking to, virtual ways of creating everything, I suddenly was like, wait a minute. There's a different way to do this, and it doesn't have to look the way I thought. And as I was discovering that and making those decisions for myself, my family was definitely uncomfortable because it's challenging everything that everyone knew and feels safe with. So the uncertainty was like too much, and it's hard, and this to anybody who's listening and part of your audience, Tiffany, there's so much courage involved in being the first. Right? Like to forge a different path or to question even the pension part, right? I remember having a conversation with my mother and I was saying, yes, I get it. The pension is so good. But that's not happening for another 2 decades.
Right.
And what do I have to endure and live in now all the way just to get there? And we know, evident by what was happening then, it was sort of as the COVID thing was winding down, that look at what could happen.
Yeah, it's
Anything can
possible
come
that you
out of
might not.
nowhere and rock everything. And if that were to happen, do I want to be showing up day in and day out to a workplace that I just don't enjoy anymore? And I was like, no, everything could be taken away. Do I want to live my life for 20 years from now? Because I'm going to get that whatever amount it is that it was always like secret. You don't even know what it's going to be anyway. Or do I want to change everything now and have a good quality of day to day living and freedom and just like fulfillment and trust that I'll pave a way for myself, that by the time those 2 decades meets me, I will be, secure and I will have what, is needed to take care of things and live a good life. And so, yeah, I would say my family definitely was like, this one lost her mind.
Yeah, yeah, and
She's like getting rid of
I think
everything.
that a big part of this is, just to provide some like a contextual background for people. We come from hard working families, working class families
Yeah.
who, our parents got up and did jobs that maybe they loved, maybe they didn't. It didn't matter because they were getting them to do it. And they did it
Right.
for decades because they wanted to provide the best life possible for us children. I mean, you were growing up in Brooklyn, I was growing
Totally.
up in Queens, but I think in that way our journeys were parallel, right?
For
And
sure.
so just understanding that our parents, their era, it was ingrained to them. You finish high school, you get a
Yeah.
good job. Let's not even talk about the fact that probably since that time, every generation after that, the kids are not doing better than the parents.
Right. Right.
That was probably the last generation of the parents, like, really thriving, but it was ingrained in them. You get a good job with a pension, get a good job with a pension, so that when
Okay.
you do retire, you have something to live on. So, understandably, it is really, I can understand how that was probably disruptive, and you were, I guess, what they would consider, like, a first gen student because you're the first
Yeah.
in your family to I mean, talk about ground can we touch on that for a second? Because that's another, like, professionally, I think that's an area that I'm very, very interested in. I'm very, very interested in people who are the first to complete college and graduate. I'm very, very interested in people who are the first in their families to become executives or entrepreneurs. But for right now, thank you. Thank you so much for spending this
Yeah.
time with
Thank
me.
you.
Thank you for always being the exceptional coach and friend that you are. And I'm so
Thank
glad that my audience got an opportunity to learn a little bit about you. And
Yeah.
I can't wait to
Thank
see.
you.
I can't wait to.
Thank you. Thank you, Tiffany. I'm honored. I'm grateful. I'm excited. I've been watching what you are up to. I'm looking forward to, I'm a fan and I'm looking forward to seeing, what unfolds and where you go. I was excited just to find out recently too that you're in a new chapter and being, in New Jersey and starting things and a different pace. And yeah, and I truly believe that it's it's going to pave way to things that in this particular moment, maybe you don't even have access to. Because I do believe that we have these seasons and these eras and these different chapters that we go through. So I'm really, really excited and I'm staying tuned. I would love to have you in the vulnerability spot, which
Yes,
is my podcast.
the new
I
spot. I
definitely
gotta
am.
get there. Yes.
Yeah, it's undergoing some changes, but I'm excited for like where it's going and what's coming. And so we will absolutely stay tuned. And to your listeners, thanks for, having me in your world for today. I'm looking forward to, being with you again. And I always say on my platform, like to be continued, because I think juicy conversations like this always get to continue.
Absolutely, they do. And this one will continue. Thank you, The Rebuild. Thank
Sure.
you for joining us. I can't wait to see you all again. Again, this is the lovely Andrea Mancuso of Intentional Healing and Wellness. I'm going to link her bio, I'm going to link her Instagram, all of her social media below
Thank
so
you.
that you can go and check her out. Be sure to like and comment and subscribe. But most importantly, be sure to share this really vulnerable conversation with someone who you care about, someone who needs to hear the words that will inspire them. Thanks again, everybody. Bye.